Good afternoon. It's Friday the 14th of June 2024, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Mike Robinson. Joining me today by video link, we have Debi Evans and Ben Rubin. Welcome to the programme, both. We're going to get started today with the G7, which of course is kicked off in Italy. And here they all are for their family photograph. Actually, the final image that we show at the very end of the programme will have the same people on it, but we'll keep that for later. So, of course, this is the G7 group of nations. That's Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK, United States, and the EU, of course, there as well. So what have they been talking about? Well, yesterday they had a session on Africa, climate change and development. And as you could see from that photograph, Africa well represented amongst the leaders there. But anyway, then they had a session on the Middle East. And finally, they had a session on Ukraine. We'll come on to that in 1 second. And then today they're talking about migration and artificial intelligence and so on. So anyway, they were having a session on Ukraine. Here they are. And Zelensky was invited. He was taking part in it. So they were very happy for their virtue signaling photographs to be published. There's Charles Michel and there is Justin Trudeau. I'm sure everybody recognizes him. And of course, Rishi Sunak was there. I'm not sure whether he left this early or not, but anyway, he was there. But what else happened? Well, of course, there was a deal done between Zelensky and Joe Biden. I'm not quite sure how that happened, as you'll see in a second. But anyway, it appears to have happened. They've signed a 10-year bilateral security deal between Ukraine and the United States. They're calling it historic. But of course, it's not really worth the paper that it's written on because it has a get-out-of-jail-free card associated with it. And that is that either party can withdraw from the agreement with 6 months' notice. So it doesn't tie whoever the next president of the United States might be into anything. So Biden, of course, then also went on to, and the others went on to announce 50 new sanctions, a crackdown on Putin's war chest. It's always Putin's, it's not Russia. It's Putin because, of course, Saul Alinsky says you've got to personalize everything, and that's what they're doing. They don't like anybody personalizing it in their direction, but they'll do it however they like. So 50 new sanctions, and this includes £50 billion loan, which they are funding by stealing the money from the sanctioned companies and individuals. So money that's been frozen by the G7 is going to be stolen and given to Ukraine instead. And they see this as a long-term funding mechanism. So they're looking forward to doing more of this. We do understand that this is the rules-based international order at work, but where apparently there are no particular rules. Now, as for Joe Biden himself, let's have a look at this little bit of video because there was a demonstration of parachutists. They were all falling out of the sky with various flags attached to themselves, and this one had the G7 flag, and all the leaders were, of course, very excited about that. But Joe got a bit bored, and he decided to walk away. And well, they all gathered around him because they wanted to herd him back into the group again, and they were looking after him very carefully. There are a bunch of videos on social media at the moment. Ben, I see you laughing there, so I'm going to ask you for comment on this because there are a bunch of videos on social media now basically showing the same kind of thing, with Biden losing attention. His attention span isn't that great anymore, losing his attention, drifting off away from the party, and then they all try to gather around him again to herd him back in the right direction. It is a bit pathetic. And my question is, at what point are we going to recognize, or are people broadly going to recognize that this man is not fit for purpose?
That's a very good question. It's been going on for some years now, right? Even in the previous presidential campaign, Biden was presenting with what essentially looks like Alzheimer's or dementias or something like that, and then nothing has happened in the subsequent 4 years to dispel those impressions. And actually, I think that it's fairly well accepted. It's fairly well accepted at this point.
Well, yes, but it's. I just find it fascinating how they are clearly slightly embarrassed about the whole situation, but they're doing their best to put a brave face on it. It's a bit pathetic, but let's just have another example of him giving his speech following the signing of the agreement with Ukraine.
It includes major commitments from Ukraine to impact and to implement democratic, economic, and security reforms.
Right, social media is just full of clips of a similar nature where he is trying to read from the auto cue, is not capable of doing it anymore. And really, is the United States seriously considering having this man stand for another 4-year term? Now, as I understand it, in the meantime, he is going to take part in a live debate with Donald Trump. I just don't see how that can possibly happen. But anyway, getting back to the G7 and related issues then, in the meantime, we have the BRICS over the last couple of days have been holding a meeting of foreign ministers, and this was taking place in Russia. This is a first gathering of BRICS since the expansion to include Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. Another 15 countries, including Turkey, were there. And one of the things that they did was to complete its de-dollarization program. So we'll talk about that in a second. But before we do, I'll just say that Lavrov on Monday was saying that BRICS countries are developing their own payments platform in order to underpin this whole thing, which is going to allow them to bypass the US dollar. And he said that the platform will improve international monetary system and allow payment in national currencies for mutual trade. Russia, of course, very keen to move its trading partners off the dollar because they effectively feel that they're being held to ransom at the moment. But let's just have a look at a quick comparison between the G7 and the BRICS. So the BRICS is in purple and the G7 is in sort of teal color here. And if we look at the global share of GDP, we see that BRICS is quite well ahead. Share of world population, of course, BRICS is very well ahead. In terms of global oil production, they're quite far ahead. And in terms of contribution to economic growth, they're very far ahead, at least double the economic growth in terms for BRICS as opposed to the G7. So we've got to ask ourselves, when we're looking or we're hearing Western countries banging the war drums as hard as they are, is this the reason for it? But of course, it's not just the BRICS countries that are looking at de-dollarization, because Saudi Arabia has ended its 80-year petrodollar deal with the United States in favor of multi-currency sales. And so what this is an article in India Today, and they're making the point that they've decided not to renew the 80-year petrodollar deal with the US. It expired on Sunday, the 9th of June. The agreement was originally signed in 1974. It's been a key part, according to this article, of US global economic influence, and of course it has. And the article saying, by choosing not to extend this contract, Saudi Arabia can now sell oil and other goods using different currencies, such as the Chinese renminbi, euros, yen, and yuan, instead of only US dollars. This is a really significant development. But before we start thinking that Saudi's doing something positive, we should also just counterpoint that with the fact that Saudi has decided to join Project Mbridge, which is the Bank for International Settlements, sort of Uber CDBC, so CBDC, sorry. So every central bank will have a central bank digital currency, and Mbridge is the glue that connects all the various central bank digital currencies together. So this is going to be what they're describing, a collaborative effort exploring a digital currency platform shared amongst central banks and commercial banks. And as this headline says, it has reached minimum viable product stage, and Saudi Arabia has decided to join. So there we go. That's a quick roundup of the G7 and the sorry state of Western leadership. Debi, where does that... Debi, thank you very much. That video clip at the beginning was incredible. I have no doubt we'll be speaking about this in extra. But Ben, let's move on to you and, queer advertising.
Absolutely, yes. It's June, so that means it's Pride Month. So the already ubiquitous LGBTQ propaganda has reached an even more fevered pitch. The question is this messaging appropriate for public consumption? Does it break advertising standards? And are some of these messages being deliberately targeted towards children and going against the wishes of their parents? Now, I'm going to draw your attention to these billboards. I took this video last week, Wednesday, the 5th of June. around 3:30 in the afternoon. And you can see that they are flashing up some rather striking messages. Now, every sort of 15 to 20 seconds, right? So this is high repetition communication across these digital billboards. They were flashing up words like pansexual, which the Cambridge Dictionary defines as sexually or romantically attracted to people of any gender. I suppose this is the upgrade of bisexual, given that we now have an infinite number of genders. Also, this was on the screen. Cisgender, a relatively new term. If you're not familiar with it, it's used to describe a person whose sense of personal identity and gender corresponds to his or her sex at birth. And then this classic, just gay. It means homosexual, and this was going on a constant basis. Like there was a constant stream of these messages popping up. I was really quite taken aback by it, to be honest with you, because this is hypersexualized. It's in your face. There's no nuance whatsoever, and I don't feel like it's appropriate or necessary for these things to be being pushed out like this in public. Which is bad enough. But then, about 3 hours later, I was walking back past the same billboards, and we should be able to see this video playing. And what it's going to show you, I won't play the whole thing, is what it will show you is that those ads, the ads saying gay, pansexual, cisgender, they aren't on the screens 3 hours later. Now, it struck me that what could be happening here is that someone has decided to deliberately target children or young people on the way home from school. If you think about who's on the road at 3:30 in the afternoon, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, it's kids, right? Whereas at 6:30 rush hour, that's when the parents are going home from work generally, right? So that seemed to me that was a deliberate attempt to target those hypersexualized messages at children, potentially young children, right? So we don't know who's going to be looking at this stuff. Really, really important. So I wanted to understand who's the organization behind this, what exactly is going on here. And I came across this website. So the organization is called socialart.work, and their URL, their web address, is very prominently placed on those adverts. You probably couldn't see it that well because I was a bit back from the ad, but it was very clear who it was coming from. It was this organization, socialart.work. You can see another example of the campaign on their screen. It's run by this fella. A lovely bit of one eye shenanigans going on there. His name is Martin Firrell, and he's a British public artist long associated with the international out-of-home industry. So that's the billboard industry, right? And these organizations that run the billboards are huge international companies. He does a lot of work with them, apparently. And he says that his works challenge unjust power systems of all kinds, including patriarchal power, the oppression of women and non-heterosexuals, and the heteronormative status quo. Okay, so you get a sense of what Mr. Ferrell's about. And this campaign was called All Varieties. It's a nationwide public artwork celebrating the labels that help people express their individuality and define their place in the world. He's got a quote from Stephen Fry. All varieties is a wonderful thing when the tide of justice around the world is moving out, leaving our beach of fellowship, love, and solidarity all the more bare. Typical Stephen Fry quote. Sounds like they're recruiting, actually, when I read that. Really quite odd, actually, when you dig into what's going on here. So a bit more about Mr. Farrell's ideological background. So he's a big socialist, apparently. Socialism is a moral idea. This is another campaign he's done. Also this one, which I came across in Hackney in 2018, 2019. I remember seeing All Men Are Dangerous. And I remember saying to my friend, why is someone telling me and everyone else that all men are dangerous? It feels like, well, first of all, it's not true. But then also, is this a deliberate attempt to divide us up? Could be. Yeah. So that was first put out in 2006, but it's certainly been run recently. As I said, I mentioned seeing it myself back in around 2019. It was certainly pre-pandemic. So highly politicized, highly sexualized. Who's behind it? Well, let's have a little look at the funders and the backers. So there's an organization called Northern. Can't find anything out about Northern. I don't know who they are, but they're very prominently placed there in the top left-hand corner. Also, Berry Brothers and Rudd, who, if you're not familiar with, they are a very, very posh and expensive wine shop in Mayfair, right? So they're in the mix here, as well as basically the entire out-of-home media industry. So this is remarkable. You've got JC Decaux, you've got Clear Channel, you've got a Light Media. You know, this is basically all of outdoor advertising across the whole of the UK. All of the billboards, all of the bus stop ads, absolutely everything are aligned behind this campaign. And the organisation that operated the billboards that I saw was this one, a Light Media. They describe themselves as positively different out of home, inclusive out of home, built on positive connections. Quite sure what that means, but anyway, they run ads, and I got in touch with them and I downloaded some of their information, and it turns out that it is actually possible through their digital planning platform to what they call offer optimized campaigns based on multiple goal types, including day parts. So you can actually select in their system specific time slots based on who you want your messages to be seen by. So actually my assumption or my interpretation of what I saw, I think is borne out by the fact the capability certainly exists to target younger people and to keep messaging away from their parents who are going to be traveling through the same area at a different time. Next organisation was this one, who I think is an interesting one to look at, Queer Britain. And the campaign describes Queer Britain as its museum partner, and Queer Britain is the UK's first and only LGBTQ plus museum. They're based on Granary Square in St Pancras, just behind St Pancras, where the big Google European headquarters, the Facebook European headquarters, the Guardian newspaper, Central St Martin's, a whole bunch of cultural and media and technology institutions are based there. That's where the Queer Britain Museum is based. They've got a load of corporate backing, so from big international drinks companies, Agio to Levi's to M&C Saatchi, the advertising agency, as well as EY, who seem to crop up everywhere I go at the moment. Universal Music Group, Sony Music Group, Fitch Group, who do ratings for the financial markets. They've got a huge network of patrons and partners, including Elizabeth Bingham, OBE, who's a top EY partner, Dr. Anne Lim, CBE, who's the former chair of the Scouts. I think it tells you what you need to know about the Scouts. Plus links with, a whole range of other big cultural institutions, from the Tate to the V&A and a whole bunch of other people, right? So we've got, as I said at the start, hypersexualized messaging apparently being targeted towards young people and children, coming from an organisation that is backed to the hilt by cultural stars like Stephen Fry, the British establishment, big international corporations, and I really just don't understand how or why this stuff is going on. So I got in touch with them. I sent them an email on Wednesday, basically to ask for a bunch of information, but specifically relating to the question, do you view younger people as your target audience for all varieties? And does this have any bearing on the timing of the advertising, like when you're putting this stuff out? Haven't received a response back yet. I think it's probably unlikely that I will. I am going to get in touch with the Advertising Standards Agency, because I actually do think that this is a violation of a part of the code which relates to causing physical, mental or moral detriment to persons under the age of 18. And, this is hypersexualized messaging. I'm not really sure why it's being put out. And certainly some questions, I think, to be answered about this organisation, what it's up to, and whether all this is legal or not.
And thank you very much for that. Okay, if you like what the UK Column does, you would like to support us, we do need your support. Please go to support.ukcolumn.org and you can, there are mechanisms to help us out there. Please do that if you possibly can, because we can only do what we do with your help. But if you can't do that, at the very least, please share anything you see on the various platforms, especially ukcolumn.org and ukcolumnextracts.co.uk. And alternatively, you could pick something up on the UK Column shop. Now, yesterday at 1 p.m., the interview that I did with Andrew Bridgen was broadcast, and that is now on the UK Column website. If you haven't seen that yet, it's quite an interesting discussion. Do watch it. I think you'll be surprised by a couple of things you see on that. So please do watch it and share it, critically share it. A reminder that on Sunday at 10 a.m. We will be having our UK Column live event. Everybody that's on screen will be taking part. We're looking forward to that. Do join us for it. It's going to be an interesting day. And then we will be at the Sounds Beautiful Festival, June 27th to 30th in Wimborne in Dorset, if you can possibly make that as well. We'd look forward to meeting you there. So that's that. Now let's move on then to Northern Ireland. And Dr. Anne McCloskey, who many people will know, was a prominent doctor speaking out on COVID issues in Northern Ireland from the beginning. She subsequently was given a fine of £255 for not conforming with COVID restrictions. And that particular legal issue has been dragging on for quite a long time now. And she ended up in court, in a magistrate's court, where she was seen in front of a district judge who gave her the option to pay the fine or go to prison. And as a result, she is now in prison. She is in prison in Hydebank Wood Prison, which is a women's prison, which is adjoined to a young offenders prison in southeast Belfast, or just to the southeast of Belfast, rather. So she's there for 14 days for not paying this fine. Now, the documentation I saw on this used the term in lieu of paying the fine, so I'm not clear at this point, and if anybody can help me, please let me know. I'm not clear whether the time in prison will remove the obligation to pay the fine, or whether she will still be required to pay it or not. But the interesting thing about this is that she was standing in the general election as an independent candidate in Derry. And so, of course, if she's in prison for the next 2 weeks, she can't do any campaigning. Her name will be on the ballot, but she doesn't get the opportunity to do any campaigning. I just find that incredible timing. Now, we should make the point that many, many people are still refusing or have not paid their COVID fines, their fines for breaking COVID restrictions. And this article from ITVX was from December, because lawyers were calling at that time to give an amnesty, because thousands of these fines remain unpaid and the courts aren't capable of actually dealing with them, because the courts are under so much pressure that they can't get them through the lists. And so, again, I'm just going to ask, why was Anne McCloskey brought to court at this time for this issue, when she made it absolutely clear that she had no intention of paying the fine? I think there's a political motivation to this. But anyway, we can discuss that more in extra as well. Let's move on then. And Debi, the NHS and people being treated in cupboards.
Oh, my goodness. Look, they want us all out of hospital. It's as simple as that. They want to frighten you so badly that you're never going to want to go to hospital. And I'm sure many people watching won't want to go to hospital. But what happens if you do go to A&E? So Sky brought out this story about nurses have declared a national emergency as NHS patients are treated in cupboards and car parks, as well as corridors, I might have to say. The story went on to say that all of this information was taken from the Royal College of Nurses survey. They'd surveyed 11,000 frontline staff and had actually called this a national emergency. Now, in the Nursing Times, nurses are warning of hospitals that are crumbling, literally falling down around their ears. And they're saying that the ceilings are falling down. They talked about it at the Royal College of Nursing Congress, which was held. And actually, I'll talk more about that in a minute. But thank you so much to Paul, one of our regular viewers and subscribers, who gives us actually full-on reports on the RCN. But they've been saying that basically the nurses are too busy watching the ceilings to see if they're moving in order to treat patients. So, as I say, the RCN Congress was held last week in South Wales, and they were discussing this a lot. And they'd also brought out a report, the RCN, and it's called Corridor Care, Unsafe, Undignified, and Unacceptable. The report goes on to say that this is affecting patients' privacy, dignity, and worryingly, more than half of the respondents said that patients had no access to life-saving equipment and they were running out of oxygen. In fact, everything is becoming so normalised now that treating patients in inappropriate areas has been normalised, and it's unsafe, undignified, and unacceptable. This was written by Professor Nicola Ranger, who's acting CEO of the RCN. And the RCN put out a very short video about corridor care. Let's have a listen.
There were patients who'd been in the department over 30 hours waiting for beds. Every cubicle was full, so there were patients on beds and trolleys in the corridors.
It is very, very difficult to provide safe, outstanding care when you haven't got the equipment, when you know patients are not having the privacy and dignity that they require. And that takes a real toll on our members.
I've felt inhumane and felt my PIN as a registered nurse is compromised.
It's a silent safety scandal.
The reason why it particularly affects nursing staff is they are the constant 24/7 presence, and they've had the stress of some people being asked to be examined in A&E departments in the toilet. What we're putting our patients through is unsafe, undignified, unacceptable, and we absolutely have a responsibility as nursing staff to call it out.
And infection control. Let's not forget that. These are never events. They would never have taken place on my watch. And many people that are watching that trained at the same time as myself will be saying the same. However, the message from the RCN, I'm so angry, the message from the RCN doesn't seem to have reached the NHS board. Let's listen to what the NHS board meeting said in February just this year.
We have a minimum risk escalation matrix, so that we say that we agree that as a trust, that the trust will not accept delays to patients requiring an ambulance in their place of residence is the highest risk to our system, not necessarily to our organisation, but our system. And then it works down with the lowest risk being business as usual. So we go from risk of being the highest is that people in their own homes, the next is people in an ambulance, the next is people in ED, and then finally when we get into the real detail around the kind of escalation plan that we have within the hospital, we're very clear about, for example, how many additional patients on a ward, and then working through the lowest risk is probably corridor care in ED, which is not great and nobody wants that, right through to caring for additional patients in areas on the wards that are not designed for those patients. So we've got a very clear risk matrix and we have various escalation triggers. Have we got complete buy-in from everybody? No. It's absolutely a work in progress.
So corridor care is acceptable for the NHS board, and yet it's been declared as an emergency from nurses. I suggest the board listen to nurses. I really do. But they don't want us in hospital. They want us out of hospital as quickly as possible. And I've noticed that more and more people, including myself, have got hospital beds in their front rooms. But where do you get these hospital beds from? Because they're saying that you get 10,000 now, we have 10,000 extra hospital beds, which is your bed. So this is a company called Vivid Care, and they're the key supplier to the NHS. Now, I'm not going to go into the mechanics of Vivid Care and who owns it, etc. We'll do that on another news. But very quickly, how do you get a free hospital bed? So the way you get a free hospital bed is basically from the NHS, from the council, from a social worker referral, from a GP referral. And in fact, there's not really any criteria. Anybody can have a hospital bed. So what do you need to have? What kind of disease or illness do you need to have? Well, that again, it spans catheter care, wound care, chronic disease management, bandaging, pressure area care, bowel care, and end-of-life care. So if you fit any of those brackets and more, that's another way to keep you out of hospital, to give you a hospital in your front room. And let's not forget, the other way to keep you out of hospital is to send you to our very good friend, or old friend now, the community diagnostic centres, of which you're going to see springing up on your high street very soon. So corridor care and cupboard care, completely unacceptable. But where are your relatives going should they have to need to visit A&E?
Thank you, Debbie, for that. Now, speaking of old friends, let's bring Mariana Spring on screen, because she has published a new article on the BBC yesterday. Bot or not, are fake accounts swaying voters towards Reform UK? And I just wanted to mention in passing the sheer hypocrisy of this article, because, of course, when it suits her to present the idea that people are using bots on social media, on Twitter and other social media, in order to drive a political narrative, she, of course, has already admitted, and she's quite proud of the fact, that she has used these types of tactics in order to troll people that are what she views as conspiracy theorists. So well done, Mariana. Glad to see you sticking to your standards there. But anyway, sticking with the media, this is really what I wanted to talk about. This is a report entitled "Preventing Torrents of Hate or Stifling Free Expression Online." And this is from the Future of Free Speech, which is a sort of pressure group think tank thing. And they're talking about the European Union in particular, and all the various legislation that the EU has brought in. But of course, what we see in terms of online safety legislation in the EU is no different to what we see here in the UK. We have the same types of strategies being employed in every G7 nation. So if we put that back on screen, let's just have a look and see what they're saying in this. The analysis found that legal online speech, so that's speech which is online, which is legal, it's no way illegal, made up most of the removed content from posts on Facebook and YouTube in France, Germany, and Sweden. Of the deleted comments examined across platforms and countries, between 87.5% and 99.7%, depending on the sample, were legally permissible. Now, of course, this harks back to the days of the Online Safety Bill as it was before it became an act, and the issue of legal but harmful content. And although that was dropped in the UK, it was only dropped sort of overtly. Covertly, it's still a thing. So let's go on with this. The highest possible proportion of permissible deleted comments was observed in Germany, where 99.7% and 98.9% of deleted comments were found to be legal on Facebook and YouTube, respectively. This could reflect the impact of the German Network Enforcement Act on the removal practices of social media platforms, which may over-remove content with the objective of avoiding the legislation's hefty fine. In comparison, the corresponding figures for Sweden are 94.6% for both Facebook and YouTube. France has the lowest percentage of legally permissible deleted comments, with 92.1% of the deleted comments in the French Facebook sample and 87.5% of the deleted comments in the French YouTube sample. Among the deleted comments, the majority were classified as general expressions of opinion. In other words, these were statements that did not contain linguistic attacks, hate speech, or illegal content, such as expressing the support for a controversial candidate in the abstract. On average, more than 56% of the removed comments fall into this category. Moderation of social media is understood by several countries as a delicate balance between freedom of expression, security and protection of minorities. However, recent events and geopolitical developments could disrupt this perceived balance. National security concerns have caused governments to try to counter misinformation and interference from hostile nations with blunt tools. We can have a whole discussion about whether what's being presented is misinformation or whether it's even being inspired by so-called governments from outside, but hostile nations. But anyway, it finally goes on to say, additionally, without making any definitive conclusions, there's some indication that legislation such as NetZero, which is the German legislation, aimed at strengthening citizens and granting them certain rights, has the unintended effect of encouraging social media platforms to delete a larger fraction of legal comments. This is a preview into the potential impact of the EU's DSA, now in force, on freedom of expression. And I'm going to say very clearly, we said this for years. This was going to be the outcome of this legislation right across the Western world, in the UK, in the EU, and in the United States. There's nothing about the intention was not, sorry, there was no unintended effect here. The effect was absolutely intended. This is about countering any narrative which goes against the official approved narrative, and it's extremely dangerous. And just to finish this segment off, I just want to remind everybody of the Cairncross review. And I'm sorry to bring Matt Hancock back on screen here. This is from 2018 when he was Secretary of State for Digital Culture, Media and Sport. And he was talking about the Cairncross review, exploring whether intervention may be required to safeguard the future of our free and independent press. And he's talking about the mainstream press, of course. Now, that was pre-COVID, and then the mainstream press, which was absolutely suffering with dodgy business plans and so on, business models rather, was supported throughout COVID with the vast advertising budget that the government presented. But let's move over to Canada, because they have, through their latest online safety legislation, have decided that they are going to impose a 3% tax on streaming platforms like Netflix and Amazon Prime and so on, in order to fund mainstream media in Canada. This is local media in Canada, but they're basically taking money from the streaming companies via the online safety legislation and using that to fund mainstream media in Canada. This is very, very dangerous, but we can talk about more. We'll talk about more about that on Extra. Ben, let's come back to you and, some election news, because perhaps some people will be voting for an AI bot.
Well, quite. He probably will get some votes, actually. Yeah, we talk a lot about democratic innovation, new forms of governance, and especially the introduction of advanced tech like AI into the democratic process is a big topic at the moment. And I came across this the other day, AI Steve, who is Brighton and Hove's first AI MP, Policies for the People, by the People. Now, it comes from a new party, it looks like, called Smarter UK, but apparently they didn't register in time as a party for the general election. So Steve, AI Steve, is going to be standing as an independent in Brighton Pavilion. It's not only a tech-enabled representative, but also a completely new way of formulating policy. So Smarter UK talks about recruiting local people into two groups, one that creates policies, they're called creators, and then commuters, who they're going to get from Brighton rail station, who will then school those policies, and they call those people validators. And any policies that meet a 50% threshold will be adopted. And then the validators will control all of AI Steve's parliamentary votes. And they call this the ultimate form of democracy, right? This is total direct control of your member of parliament. So you can sign up on their website to be a creator or a validator. And then it says here, how can AI Steve actually represent me in Parliament? Well, it turns out that AI Steve is backed up by another Steve Endicott, who is a Sussex entrepreneur. He's created many of the initial policy ideas and will physically attend Parliament to vote on policies as guided by AI Steve's feedback from his constituents. All right, so I'm just reading this directly from the website. So although Steve maintains a house in Brighton and will use this when attending Parliament, he actually now lives in Rochdale with his new wife, which will restrict his ability to talk to constituents in Brighton and Hove. So they've created this AI platform so that Steve Endicott can live outside of Brighton and still do the job of the MP. It seems incredibly convoluted. And also, this model removes the kind of traditional relationship, human-to-human, peer-to-peer relationship that we're supposed to have with our members of Parliament, right? Because this is Steve, actually. You know, it's not that little avatar that we've been looking at. It's this guy. And they actually look different, and they are different, ultimately, because Steve Endicott is a real person. He's not an AI bot, right? And he's got a background. So he's an entrepreneur. He was the UK MD of a £4 billion turnover travel business, so a pretty successful guy. He describes himself as a capitalist with socialist conscience, which sounds a little bit public-private partnership to me. You know, that remains to be seen. He says he's a green evangelist. Yes, he's big into sustainability, and particularly the rollout of electric vehicles. And he can bring clear leadership because he's been a company director since he was 25. He understands business, he understands commercial realities, all that kind of stuff. He's not just some silly career politician. But let's dig into this a bit more. So I went to have a look at his LinkedIn profile to find out what all of that actually means. He says he's big in business. Let's find out some more. So he's the chairman of an organization called Neural Voice and another one called Neural River. And these are the AI incubators, the AI technology firms that have been used to build AI Steve and the underlying technology. He also, it looks like, made a bunch of money during the lockdowns, building work from home spaces. So, entrepreneurial, opportunistic, obviously a big fan of lockdowns because he seems to have made quite a bit of money from it. And then crucially, he's also the chairman of this thing, Electric Car Organization, ECO, which provides end-to-end solutions to increase uptake of electric vehicles from testing, leasing, buying, driving to charging the whole way through. Right, so he talks about being a politician with a green agenda, but actually, really crucially, he's potentially going to make a lot of money out of this as well. Right, so there's a very clear conflict of interest going on that they're not really trying to hide. Right, this is all written into the communication. So why would you vote for him? So there are a whole bunch of reasons. We'll go back to their website here. We can see why would we vote for AI Steve? Well, sensible and practical policies. That's the first thing, right? So they don't employ any career politicians. It's completely staffed by sensible business people. Also very sensible. No political egos. That's good. And they've actually done quite a good job in their policy platform of cutting through the traditional left-right issues. So he's pro-immigration, for example, very pro-immigration, but then also pro-prisons. And those two things would normally be seen as left and right issues. And they've done quite a neat job of bringing those things together. He described himself as practically green. So basically, we've got to save the planet, but we've got to do it in a way that's affordable. Very much driven by technology. So actually, and there's a real interesting little hint here. They've talked about creating AI Steve, but they actually think that they could reform government more broadly with this same technology, right? So they've clearly got big ambitions. Why else would we vote for him? So he's available 24/7, 365. Have you ever tried to get a meeting with your MP? It takes months. They don't reply to you. You have to go to their office. Whereas AI Steve, you can chat to him 24 hours a day from the comfort of your own home, 7 days a week, including bank holidays and Christmas Day. Isn't that convenient? Everything will be transcribed and captured through the platform. You'll have much more involvement with the creation of policies. So this is kind of a bit like it's venturing into the sort of sortition territory that we talked about previously. It's not exactly what it is, but it does strike me that we have a group of creators that are selected from somewhere. It's not specific as to where they come from. And then a bunch of validators, which is just the general public. So interesting to see how that would actually play out and in practice. And then the final point for why you would vote for him is because you can actually control your MP via AI, right? So they want to give you, they want to give me, they want to give the general population total control, and they see this as a potential future model for how parliamentary democracy is going to play out, right? So it's pretty interesting. One of the policies, just very quickly to wrap up, it's Brighton and Hove issues. So big on education and youth. They're talking about cutting tuition fees for university by 50% and paying for that by doubling or even, I think, quadrupling the cost for foreign students. So that, again, they're big on immigration, bringing people into the country. Really big on affordable housing, NetZero homes. And they're talking about automatically granting planning permission for applications on brownfield sites, right? So they're going to potentially completely remodel and transform the centre of Brighton based on these policies. Good policy, scrap ULEZ, great, but also on the flip side of it, talking about making huge investments into electrification and green infrastructure, which Steve will make a lot of money from, importantly, Brighton voters, bear that in mind. And obviously, because it's Brighton and also because it's Pride Month, he's paying tribute to the LGBTQ plus community and promising to pay for lots of parties for them because they're so special and important. So a big platform, a big move into a technological future, and we'll see how Steve does in a few weeks at the general election.
Thank you, Ben. And Debi, let's come back to you then, and more on the NHS, and we're beginning with blood.
Oh, yes, we're all talking a lot about blood, aren't we, just recently? And there's a very good reason why. So, of course, many of you will know, and we've reported it before, about the cyber attack that took place in London. They've been asking for urgent appeals for blood donors. I can't see that there's going to be a huge queue. However, they're looking for O blood type. O positive blood type donors because of the cyber attack. So NHS in trouble there. NHS also been trying to reclaim a lot of money back from a company who were making faulty PCR tests. This is Novacyt. They've agreed to pay the government £5 million to settle the claims that they supplied the NHS with faulty tests. I don't suppose they'll be telling any of the people that had used the faulty tests about this. The claim was originally much, much bigger. It was for 145 million. The article does go on to say about these failed tests and that the government had basically been sold a load of tests that never worked. But did you take one? The Independent are talking about thousands of blood samples set to be destroyed after that very same cyber attack. It seems to have rippling consequences. So all of these blood tests now have got to be destroyed, and most of the GP surgeries where they were obtained are in the same area as the area that was cyber attacked. So that's South London, Bromley, Southwark, Lambeth, Bexley, Greenwich and Lewisham. So if you had your blood taken and you haven't got a result, that's probably why. And digitisation, isn't it fantastic? Because even down here in Cornwall, we had a complete outage and procedures were cancelled, outpatients appointments were cancelled because of significant IT issues. So not all in the park is rosy for the NHS, far from it.
Okay, and what about greenhouse gas emissions?
Well, yes, this was just a little finally, because I happened to see a story in the Daily Mail, I think it was this week, saying that we're not going to be able to breathe because we're breathing out too much methane, carbon. You know, it basically breathing's not good for you. So I went back to this article in The Conversation. We calculated the UK's greenhouse gas emissions from people breathing out. Here's what we found. And they're finding out that actually we should all be holding our breath. But of course, we can't hold our breath, can we? But that's obviously what they've got in line for us. Fits in quite nicely with Agenda 2030, doesn't it? And for anybody that wants to see the academic paper, here's a slide of the academic paper that you can go and have a look at.
Yes, and just to end, we began with the G7. We'll just end with the G7. And I just wanted to highlight this tweet from somebody taking that family photograph that we showed at the very beginning. And you can see they've all been labelled as unelected bureaucrats, too senile to stand trial. We know who that is. 26% approval rating, about to lose election, just lost election, 50-year low poll numbers. We get the idea. And I mean, obviously, everybody in the West totally viewing appropriately the standard of leadership that we have. We should leave that there, I think, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in extra. So thank you very much, Debbie and Ben, today. Thanks for everybody that watched. We will be back in a couple of minutes if you're UK Column member for some extra, and we will see you there. Otherwise, we'll see you at 10 a.m. on Sunday, hopefully, for UK Column Live. See you then. Bye-bye.